So, hi, Teresa from Humanitarians here today, and we're going to talk about security management. So, it may seem basic to go into what security management actually is, but I think it's important to establish at least a baseline understanding. So, what is security management really? The word security means being free from threat or danger, and the word safety is being protected from something or someone that could cause the danger, the risk, or the injury. So, security management is all about making sure that people and things are safe from threats and dangers. The types of threats and how many threats are present in a specific place obviously depends on many different things. In humanitarian work, organizations and aid workers very often work in armed conflict zones or where there are high levels of criminality due to resource scarcity and where weapons are very easy to find. There's a perception of abundance as well, that NGOs, agencies, the UN, etc. Has a lot of things, right? So that makes it a target. And when you think of it from different perceptions, the perception of abundance is really real. It's true, right? No matter where you work, there will always be a need for effective security management, even when you're not working in a conflict zone. There are always threats present. It just varies what types. Threats and dangers don't just come from armed actors. There's fires, there's accidents, thefts, fraud, abuse, damage to assets, and all other types of threats depending on where you are and what you're doing. But what is a threat exactly? And what's a risk? Sometimes there seems to be a lot of confusion between the two. So my job here is to try to simplify it and make it easier to understand. A threat is defined as someone or something likely or probable to cause harm or damage. So let's say the potential to cause harm or damage. Something that's a danger to someone or something. Threat and danger are more or less the same, just used in different ways semantically. Risk, on the other hand, is defined as a situation involving exposure to danger or threat. So the threat or danger is one thing, and then the risk is your exposure to it. So risk, by nature, is a question of degrees or probability of a threat materializing or a danger happening. But there has to be a threat for there to be a risk. If you never leave the base, you cannot be at risk from a car movement ambush, obviously, right? But the threat exists. But if you don't leave the base, then there's no risk. I personally find it easier to think of security management in terms of threat and danger management. It's just clearer to me for some reason. A threat is a threat and I understand it like that. Then I just need to analyze the exposure to it and what things affect that exposure. Raise it, lower it, etc. Security management shouldn't be something that is happening on an Excel sheet or in long Word documents that then are not usable or stuck in some drawer somewhere. Effective security management is a combination of many things: information gathering and processing, and activities directed to targeted, relational, analytical, strategical, and tactical action. That is what it is. Threat management, as I said before, is easier to understand because it's like a danger. Risk, it's more complicated because it's a question of degree and probability, low, medium, negligible, high, and can move up and down depending on the many variables. And it's difficult to gauge, difficult to evaluate, right? That probability. Because there's too many variables usually at play, so it's harder to quantify and analyze properly. So I'm not sure it's the best use of our time. My advice is to take an expansive threat approach to your security management. Let's look at an example of why it might be easier to do that, using the lens of a death threat, say. Most of us in decision-making roles have had to manage at least one death threat. However, they're not always reflected on risk analysis Excel sheets. Death threats can be directed at anyone on your staff and come from literally anyone. And they can be motivated by many, many different things. The problem when managing a death threat is the difficulty of judging how credible it is. And usually there's very little information. This is very difficult to establish, almost impossible, especially if you don't know who it came from or why. Direct threats or warnings, let's say, from an armed group are clearer to manage than other types of threats that might be motivated from grievances or something, or revenge or something like that. So if you try to do the usual risk analysis with a death threat, in my view, it would be really hard. No? An organization is always at risk of this happening. So how to calculate the probability when you're doing a risk assessment? Basically, to carry out a death threat is really easy, and it's low risk for a person doing it. So, it's hard to guess that. You could, of course, record every threat made to every organization in the area or in the country or in the whatever, but still, what would be the point of that? More important, I'm sure you will agree, would be to analyze what the organization did and what happened when they got a threat and what type of threat it was. This establishes precedent for management of a threat, which is the most important thing. So instead of trying to decide how probable the risk of a death threat is, just include it in your threat list, but with all the different threat scenarios possible, and then, the most important thing, design a contingency strategy for each scenario. For example, one scenario could be a threat from a fired staff, which is quite common. Another could be from a recruitment process where someone thinks they were discriminated against, or a threat because of resource allocation, renting cars, etc., etc. You can't predict or stop a death threat from happening, but you can decide in advance how you are going to manage it. It seems to me a much better of our time to do this than just writing death threat in one column and then guessing the risk, medium risk, say, in another column, and no real mitigation or management strategies in the risk assessment sheet, which is quite common. So trying to do a risk assessment on an Excel sheet about how possible a death threat is a futile exercise, because without contextualizing it well enough, you can't mitigate effectively. And that applies to everything. A threat without contextualization is very difficult to mitigate. Most threats, because you can't prevent a lot of them from happening, you have to prepare to manage them. And that means envisaging different materializations of the same type of threat, using a what if, then I, or then we structure, which is very important in security management. What if, then. What if a car ambush, then we do this. And that's the same for everything. Another advantage of thinking in terms of threats and dangers instead of risks is that it comes naturally to us. We and all other creatures on this planet are hardwired with an internal threat management system. That is why in the presence of a threat or a danger, our attention is directed to it, to the exclusion of everything else. The body and brain moves into threat management. Identifying all of the threats in the places you are working in and working out all the different ways in which they could happen is the best way to effectively manage them. We call that analyzing the threat landscape, and it is extremely important to do well. Also, as you will see, looking at threats in the abstract, that means with no contextualization, is not effective security management. And it is, as I said before, it is extremely hard to mitigate something abstract, something that has no contextualization. As we go through these different videos, we will see how to do all of that. And don't forget, for more advanced security management, once you finish this course, we have another advanced course. So what is security management? The word security basically means being free from threat or danger. And the term safety is being protected from something or someone that could, I repeat that. Start again. So what is security management really? The word security means being free from threat or danger. And the term safety is being let's go again.